In 2001, the U.S. Library of Congress acquired a collection of drawings that were made in the Gold Rush era. You've probably seen some of them before. They've been reprinted many times. The library attributed those drawings to a prospector from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, named Daniel Jenks. When Jenks left for the California Gold Rush in 1849, he was a 21-year-old son of a Baptist deacon who was unemployed, and by his own account, he had no marketable skills. When the Library of Congress purchased those drawings, little was known of Daniel's travels. In 2012, something exciting happened. Daniel's 5-volume collection of Gold Rush journals surfaced in his hometown. Written between 1849 and 65 to what Daniel called an imaginary confidant, it's a first-hand chronicle of both the California and Colorado gold rushes that had never been published in full before. Christie's auction house sold the Jenks Journals for a whopping $185,000. In their auction catalog, Christie's described the collection as one of the most vivid and best-written gold rush journals we have ever handled. Considering the source, that's no small praise. I learned about the Jenks Journals in 2019, just before the COVID pandemic shut the world down. Instead of binge-watching Netflix or playing video games, I turned transcribing and publishing his journals into my pandemic pastime. In 2021, 172 years after Daniel made his first entry in his diaries, the Jenks Journals were finally published. It's an amazing first-hand account of life in America's Wild West, and a must-read for all history buffs. After publishing Daniel's journals, I wanted to know more about the trails he traveled on and exactly where he was when he made those drawings. But I was at a major disadvantage. I was an IT guy, and I knew very little about the Wild West or immigrant trails or westward expansion. So I started by downloading all of the old land surveys that the General Land Office made along Daniel's route. And I tried to follow along using his journal entries, and it was actually a very interesting and educational hobby, well, for a while at least. Unfortunately, after many fits and starts, I totally lost Jenks's Trail up near Denver. That's when I realized if I was going to do this project right, I'd be needing some help. That's when I found OCTA, the Oregon California Trails Association. When I read their mission statement, protecting the historic immigrant trails legacy by promoting research, education, preservation activities, and public awareness of the trails, and to work with others to promote these causes, well, it seemed to match. So I joined their group, and I started asking questions. That's how I met Bruce Watson. Bruce is an immigrant trail mapping expert, and when he asked me to quantify the rabbit hole I was trying to lure him down into, I said, "Bruce, it's a gigantic, mind-boggling American history puzzle, and there's no way I can solve it by myself." And Bruce said, "I'm in." Well, it took us months to decipher Jenks's cross-country route in 1859, all the way from Kansas City, Missouri to Yreka, California. Along the way, we learned Daniel had actually traveled on 4 of America's most historic immigrant trails: the Santa Fe Trail, the Cherokee Trail, the Overland Trail, and the California Trail. And we also learned where Jenks was when he drew most of those iconic sketches, too. This year, I published the complete text of Daniel's first-hand account of that journey on Google Earth as an interactive map. Someday, I'm hoping history-minded youngsters might find it interesting. As I was researching Daniel's route through Colorado, I learned about some little-known historic sites. And in this video, I'd like to take you on a quick tour of the old Cherokee Trail from Pueblo to Denver and share some of my findings with you. Our Cherokee Trail tour begins 12 miles east of Pueblo at an almost mythical branch of the Cherokee Trail called the Chico Creek Cutoff. Next, we'll visit the little-known gold rush settlement of Fountain City. Then it's on to Independence Camp, 15 miles north of Pueblo, a gold rush campground with a direct connection to Julia Holmes, the first American woman to climb Pikes Peak. Our next stop's at Fountain, Colorado, where we'll explore an intriguing pre-territorial land claim that I found. Then it's on to Bluestem Prairie Open Space, historic Jimmy Camp, and Berlemann Ranch, where segments of the Cherokee Trail can still be seen to this very day. We'll close out the tour with stops at Point of Rocks, another gold rush campground, the gold rush boomtown of Russellville, and by taking a closer look at Denver City's oldest plat map. Before we begin, I have to give a shout out to researcher Glenn Scott at the USGS. In the 1970s, Mr. Scott conducted a series of trail investigations where he recorded most of Colorado's historic trails. I've spent years researching small parts of Glenn Scott's maps, and I've barely scratched the surface. If you're interested in Colorado history at all, you really should check them out. This is a snippet from Glenn Scott's map of the Pueblo Quadrangle, and it shows us that almost every major expedition that came to Colorado back in the day traveled through this territory. But if you paraphrase the content in those expedition reports, this is what they wrote about their travels between Pikes Peak and Pueblo. We went from Pikes Peak to Pueblo. Well, that didn't give me much information to work with. But those expedition reports did mention the same three landmarks: Pikes Peak, Fountain Creek, what the French used to call Fontaine-qui-Boyle, and a lodgepole trail. Well, today the highway between Colorado Springs and Pueblo is on the west side of Fountain Creek. But in the old days, the trails immigrants used to get here were on the east side of Fountain Creek. The lodgepole trail that was mentioned in those expedition reports ran along the east bank of Fountain Creek, and it was truly an ancient road that had been known by many names. The Old Indian Trail, the Taoist to Fort Laramie Trail, the Divide Trail, the War Road, Trappers Trail, but after 1849, it became known as the Cherokee Trail. In Elliot West's excellent book, The Contested Plains, Mr. West called the ancient trail network that ran along the Colorado Front Range perhaps the oldest path in North America, and North America's most ancient axis of movement. The Cherokee Trail's story actually begins out east. In 1829, gold was discovered in Georgia, the Cherokees' homeland. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was signed into law, and thousands of Cherokee were forcibly relocated to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. Well, many of those Cherokee already knew how to mine for gold. They had come from gold country. So when news of gold discoveries in California reached them, the Cherokee said, "Why not us?" In 1849, the Cherokee blazed a trail from Oklahoma to the Santa Fe Trail, which they followed westward to Bensoul Fort, near today's La Junta. At Bensoul Fort, the old Santa Fe Trail veered southward towards Santa Fe. In 1849, everything west of that fort was considered to be the American wilderness. Only small cadres of mountain men, trappers, and traders, and of course the natives who called it home, would be found there. In 1849, the Cherokee traveled along the Arkansas River from Bensoul Fort to Pueblo. When they left Pueblo, the Cherokee followed that ancient lodgepole trail northward. When the Cherokee returned in 1850, they stopped 12 miles east of Pueblo at Chico Creek. In their company was a well-respected Delaware guide named Ben Simons. Ben told them there was a little-known shortcut here called the Chico Creek Cutoff. It was an old Indian trail that led across the Chico Basin to a cottonwood grove on Fountain Creek, 15 miles north of Pueblo. One of the Cherokee party's diarists wrote, "There was no sign of a road." But later, they would learn Ben Simons was right. Over time, two different branches of the Chico Creek Cutoff were used. The 1850 branch, the one the Cherokee followed, went northwest across the Chico Basin. 15 miles north of Pueblo, it ran into the old trail along Fountain Creek at a cottonwood grove that would later become known as Independence Camp. In 1866, a new branch of the Chico Creek Cutoff came into use. It swooped farther northward and ran nearby my home. In the late 1800s, the 1850 branch of the Chico Creek Cutoff was still in use. As you can see, it was even shown on a few maps. But today, both the 1850 and 1866 trails have become difficult to discern. At present, the only LiDAR data I have access to in this area is of low resolution. Someday, when high-res LiDAR becomes available, the exact route those Chico Creek cutoffs took will finally be revealed. Last year, we visited the Chico Basin Ranch. In the old days, it was known as Holmes Ranch. When I shared a map with the ranch manager that showed the Chico Creek cutoffs had actually went through their property, he was surprised. They had no idea those historic trails were even there. The next stop on our Cherokee Trail tour is Daniel Jenks' Camp 38 at a gold rush settlement he called Fountain City. What you're looking at here is a snippet from a survey diagram of Colorado's Fountain Valley that was made by the General Land Office in 1862, and it reveals something intriguing. During the gold rush years, there were actually two settlements near the junction of Fountain Creek and the Arkansas River, not one. There was Fountain City and Pueblo. A few years after Jenks's visit, Fountain City would become a part of Pueblo. To date, we've only found two 19th century maps that show both of those town sites on them. Not being a map expert myself, I feared there were maps we'd missed. So I asked our friends at the Rocky Mountain Map Society for a second opinion, and they confirmed our findings. In his Gold Rush Journal, Daniel Jenks left us a rare first-hand account of Fountain City and introduced us to its founder, drunken George McDougal. Here's what Jenks wrote. There's a little collection of mud huts and log cabins at the mouth of this creek, inhabited by mountaineers and Mexicans and called by some the Puebla, by others since the gold humbug Fountain City. Near this place Lauren, Daniel's cousin, intends to squat. I would not stop here for all the wealth of Pikes Peak. A very dissipated but talented brother of Governor McDougal of California lives here, or rather exists here, for it's not a living. Another, a Mr. Schaffner and Mr. Wilson, two well-educated men, are wearing out an existence here. Oh, they say, we have lived in the mountains so long, we don't feel at home anywhere else. Society has no charms for us. They are living illustrations of the saying, I had rather be a king amongst hogs than a hog amongst kings. Everything is free to those they like, and as they took a fancy to us, we were on the free list. Do you want to know why George McDougal put Jenks and Company on the free list? Well, that's because Lauren Jenks's wife, Lizzie, was very pregnant. And when they arrived at Fountain City, she actually gave birth to a baby boy. Daniel tells us in his journal that they named the baby Dan Jenks. But the following day, baby Jenks died. In Hall's History of Colorado, Lizzie Jenks was memorialized. In April, the Venerable Matthew Steele arrived with his family. Stephen Smith, a brother of Josiah, came out from the States. Also, William H. Young and Lauren Jenks, whose wives were, after Mrs. Middleton, the first American mothers of the country. I'm a big fan of the Daughters of the American Revolution, so I was pleased to learn they'd erected a monument to memorialize Fountain City. But for some reason, the DAR researchers didn't mention George McDougal. My friend Nancy Prince is a retired geologist and an expert genealogist. She probably knows more about Fountain City than anyone now. And her research is shedding new light onto this little-known part of Pueblo, Colorado's history. Go, Nancy. Our next stop is 15 miles north of the old Pueblo at Independence Camp, Daniel Jenks' Camp 41. This is where my research adventure began. You see, I'm a Colorado transplant, and I live between Fountain and Pueblo. Historically speaking, that's flyover country. There was no gold in them thar hills, so little history was ever recorded here. To learn more about my new home, I decided to read a Colorado history book from cover to cover. Well, at least that was my plan. But when I got to page 20, something stopped me dead in my tracks. Here, let me paraphrase the excerpt for you. On July 4th, 1858, 15 miles north of Pueblo, the Lawrence Party named a cottonwood grove Independence Camp and celebrated the Independence Day holiday by taking the afternoon off and drinking the rest of their whiskey. Among the vanguard of gold seekers who came to Colorado in 1858, the Russell and Lawrence parties are probably the most well-known. The Russell party came from Georgia, and they're credited with finding the first gold up near Denver. The Lawrence party was from Kansas, and they had in their company Julia Holmes, the first American woman to climb Pikes Peak, and William Parsons, author of the famous Pikes Peak Gold Rush guidebook, The New Gold Mines of Western Kansas. Members of the Russell and Lawrence parties founded some of Colorado's first towns, so everything they named is historically important. To date, we've only found 4 maps with Independence Camp on them, and they were all made in 1859. The Independence campsite has never been memorialized. Like Fountain City, Daniel Jenks also left us a rare first-hand account of Independence Camp and drew the only picture of that historic place I've ever seen. While the Gold Rush campground at Jimmy Camp is still remembered in the history books, Julia Holmes's Independence Camp has almost been forgotten, and I set out to change that. In 2022, I told the folks at Okta about my Independence Camp research, and in 2023, they sent Richard Hunt, a videographer, to help me document the story. Now, the first time Independence Camp appeared on a map after 1859 was on Glenn Scott's Pueblo quadrangle map. As you can see, the campground sat at the junction of the Cherokee Trail and the 1850 branch of the Chico Creek Cutoff. In later years, the campsite would become a stop on the local stagecoach route. Coincidentally, that's also where Daniel Jenks' cousins planted roots and created their homestead. Jenks Ranch was a very popular place during the Gold Rush days. Between Independence Camp and Fountain, Colorado, the Cherokee Trail ran along the east bank of Fountain Creek through today's Hanna and Frost ranches. In the 1860s, near the north end of Hanna Ranch, was John Bley's ranch. Bley was one of El Paso County's first county commissioners and an important figure in Colorado's early history. Last year, the landowners gave us access to the site, and with some metal detecting experts from the Pikes Peak Adventure League and a few members of the Pikes Peak chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society, we spent a few hours exploring Bley's ranch. We found a few artifacts from the Gold Rush era, but what we didn't find surprised me the most. There was no modern trash on the site. That's actually great news. Unfortunately, someday, a major roadway will probably be built through this part of Hannah Ranch. Before that happens, we need to learn as much about this place as we can. The next stop on our Cherokee Trail tour is the city of Fountain, Colorado. If you recall, Daniel Jenks told us his cousin Lauren was going to stay here in Colorado. My research deep dive into Colorado's oldest records proved that was true. During my search for Jenks info, I ran across this intriguing land claim for a place called Junction City. This particular claim caught my attention because of the date that was referenced on it, February 1858. Well, I never expected to find any records that old in this part of Colorado, but there it was. The claim was filed in 1860 to document a piece of land that had been claimed in 1858. At first, I assumed the 1858 reference was just a scribal error, a typo. Well, but it wasn't. Here, let me zoom in. As you can see, the claim is clearly dated 1858, not 1859 as I expected. Well, here's how they describe the location of that land claim. It was at the junction of the road leading from Colorado City to Fountain City, which you now know was down near Pueblo, and the road from Denver City to Fountain City via the Cherry Creek and Jimmy Camp route. But excepting historians, few people in modern times would understand what that means. But now that I'm a trail mapper, thanks to Bruce Watson, I know exactly where that land claim was located. The historic crossroad that's described in that Junction City land claim would later become known as Fountain, Colorado. Back in the gold rush days, all roads in this part of Colorado led to Fountain. The Junction City site has also never been memorialized. During my research, I discovered some very interesting facts about the historic trails that went through the Fountain area. Let's take a closer look. In 1843, famous explorer John Fremont traveled up the old Lodgepole Trail along Fountain Creek. When he arrived at the site of today's city of Fountain, Fremont took the old Trappers Trail that ran alongside Jimmy Camp Creek up to Jimmy Camp. In 1849 and 50, following Fremont's lead, the Cherokee parties also took that trail along the creek up to Jimmy Camp. On the Cherokee's 1850 excursion to California, Lewis Ralston found the first traces of placer gold near today's Denver. In 1858, Mr. Ralston returned to Colorado with the Russell Party. But the Russell Party took a different route to Jimmy Camp, one that went straight through today's Bluestem Prairie open space. The easterly route to Jimmy Camp, the one Fremont and the Cherokee parties traveled on, is more or less gone. But thanks to the city of Colorado Springs, part of the Russell Party's trail can still be seen to this very day. From the south side of Fountain to its border with Colorado Springs to the north, the old Russell Party Trail has been developed. If the city of Colorado Springs didn't own Bluestem Prairie open space, all signs of that western branch of that historic trail to Jimmy Camp would probably be long gone too. With the city's permission, Octa trail mappers explored Bluestem Prairie open space. It's the first spot north of the Arkansas River where the public can still see a section of that long-lost ancient trail network. The most prominent feature at Bluestem, the Big Johnson Reservoir, sits in the lowlands. The old Russell Party Trail entered Bluestem from the south at the junction of today's Goldfield Drive and Fontaine Boulevard. One of the main branches of that old trail ran along the reservoir's east bank. Portions of that old trail are still visible on the ground, but Bluestem was a working cattle ranch for many years, and the soil's been greatly disturbed there. Only the most prominent trail features can still be seen. Well, this is what Bluestem looks like with high-res LiDAR. It's like someone turned the lights on in a dark room. The LiDAR imagery reveals that over time, seasonal routes evolved along the trail. In the dry season, travelers could move through the lowlands, but when things got wet, they'd travel across the highlands. Between Bluestem Prairie Open Space and Jimmy Camp, as you can see, the airport was built over the old trail, and not much trail mapping can be done here anymore. Welcome to historic Jimmy Camp, Colorado's most famous gold rush campground. With a surplus of water, firewood, feed, and shelter, natives had been camping here for millennia. In the early 1800s, trappers, traders, and mountain men began visiting Jimmy Camp too. As you can see, Colorado Springs' urban sprawl has almost enveloped the site. While part of Jimmy Camp is privately owned, the city of Colorado Springs are proud stewards of the rest. There are just so many interesting details we could talk about at Jimmy Camp. It really deserves its own presentation. Here's what Daniel Jenks wrote when he visited the site in 1859. This hole is sort of an oasis in the desert, with good feed and water, and plenty of wood for cooking purposes. Found the first pine here that I've seen on the road. We found here about 20 teams of Pikes Peakers in camp for the night. We were so late getting into camp, we had to go supperless to bed, for it was too dark to hunt for wood or water. In 2023, the city gave us access to the Jimmy Camp site. And after shooting the video at Independence Camp, we recorded a history video there too. Jimmy Camp is one of the crown jewels of Colorado's gold rush history. And hats off to the city of Colorado Springs for doing what they can to preserve it. North of Jimmy Camp, the Cherokee Trail went around the east side of today's Black Forest. Back in the gold rush days, they called it the Pinery. Well, the next stop on our tour is Berlemann Ranch, just down the trail from the next gold rush campground on our tour at Point of Rocks. Octa member Bill Burr shared a map with his friend Ed, showing the Cherokee Trail actually ran right through Ed's property. That's me with Ed in the upper right-hand corner. Ed shared the news with his neighbors, Annie and Butch Berlemann, on the upper left. The Berlemanns invited Octa to come map the trail, and over 100 gold rush artifacts were found in their yard. Annie, being a scientist, has analyzed, researched, cataloged, and preserved all the finds. And she estimates 1 out of every 500 wagons that traveled through their property over the years left an artifact there. Interesting. Here's what Berlemann Ranch looks like with LiDAR. At first, the high concentration of artifacts that were found there really confused me. When I saw the next slide, it shed some light on things. This view shows us at the north end of Berlemann Ranch, there was a convergence of creeks. What you can't see is just before your wagon would have reached that creek junction, there's a drop-off. Taking wagons down that slippery slope in the wet season would have been something you did very carefully. So I can imagine wagons pausing here, waiting in queue for their turn to advance. When you think of Berlemann Ranch as kind of a rest area, the proliferation of artifacts there, well, it begins to make more sense. Just down the road from Berlemann Ranch is Daniel Jenks' Camp 43 at Point of Rocks. If you visited Point of Rocks in the gold rush days, you would have seen many campfires and wagons here. Numerous explorers wrote of Point of Rocks in their journals. Here's what Russell Party diarist Luke Tierney wrote about the site in 1858. We passed a perpendicular rock 500 feet high, at the base of which was a tomb of recent origin, occupied by some unfortunate itinerant. At its head stood a wooden cross bearing the inscription, Charles Michael Fagan, 1858. But a couple weeks later, the Lawrence party arrived at Point of Rocks, and something had changed. For some reason, William Parsons recorded Fagan's grave as O'Falley's grave. And when Daniel Jenks arrived 1 year later, he called it O'Falley's grave too. And that's how we know Daniel Jenks was following the directions in William Parsons' Gold Rush guidebook on his journey. Between Point of Rocks and Russellville, there's some really good trail mapping news. Notice, modern roads were never built on top of the Cherokee Trail here. Most of the land in this territory is privately owned. The ranchers we met have been excited to learn that a historic trail ran through their property. This stretch of the trail offers many opportunities for future generations of trail mappers to be taught. My friends at the Pikes Peak posse of Westerners had a meetup at Russellville, and they asked me to read what Daniel Jenks had wrote about the place in his journal. Daniel wrote, "This is one of the prosperous mining towns we have heard so much of." Well, Daniel was being facetious because it was anything but a prosperous mining town. There was a sawmill and about a dozen log cabins here, but the sawmill was stopped and the houses unoccupied. We saw but 4 men here. So to put things in perspective, in 1857, the U.S. economy literally collapsed. They called it the Panic of 1857. Many Americans were desperate. So in 1858, when news of the Russell and Lawrence Party search for gold in Colorado spread like wildfire, newspaper accounts of easy gold pickings at boom towns like Russellville led thousands of gold seekers to head for Pikes Peak, what they were calling the New El Dorado. But, unfortunately, many of those people were unprepared for a trip across the great American desert, and they would never return to their homes. Like much of the Cherokee Trail in Colorado, between Russellville and Denver, a modern road was built over top of the trail. The original Cherokee Trail is gone, and no trail mapping will occur here. In closing, let me give you a brief glimpse into how the trail mapping sausage is actually made. What you're looking at here is the first survey the General Land Office made of the area around Denver in 1861. On the bottom, the South Platte River is on the left, and Cherry Creek is on the right. Near the top, on either side of Cherry Creek, are the competing gold rush town sites of Yreka and Denver City. The first time I saw this plat map, it made me curious. You see, in this state, History Colorado is HQ for all things historical. This is where their museum would have appeared on that old plat map. And by the way, if you haven't been to the History Colorado Center in downtown Denver, you really should check it out. It's amazing. Notice, to the right, there's a trail, and there's some writing on it, but it's really difficult to read. Here, let me zoom in so you can see it. That writing says, the Old Cherokee Trail. Here's what the view looks like on Google Earth. It turns out the History Colorado Center was only a couple blocks away from the Cherokee Trail, and very few people in modern times are even aware of it. The Cherokee parties blazed historic trails in 1849 and 50, and their stories deserve to be remembered. But if you follow the Cherokee Trail from Benswell Fort near La Junta, Colorado, to Fort Bridger in western Wyoming, as close as modern roads will allow you to, you probably won't see a single road sign that mentions the Cherokee Trail. I think we should change that. I'm told both Kansas and Wyoming show the Cherokee Trail on their state's tourism maps. Someday, I'm hoping Colorado would do that too. Thank you so much for listening.